This build is an updated version of my Turret Master back from the Outriders launch. We've leveled up, we've killed all the bad guys, and we've made potentially the best solo build in Outriders. Let's break down this Technomancer build for you guys to try. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do a Devastator or a Pyromancer build for Outriders Worldslayer. I've been enjoying the new expansion. It's actually a lot of fun. So how this build works really is it revolves around two things: your turrets and applying status effects to enemies to maximize your damage. The turrets really are the star. The cryo turret and the blighter turrets are your primary damage sources and should always be active. With the correct mods, you can have up to 3 turrets active, as well as adding additional effects around your turrets. Cold Snap is our third skill, which is essentially just used as a large AoE freeze around you to deal damage to everything that's around you, give you a bit of a get out of jail free card in that you can avoid some damage hits. You can also freeze all the enemies around you and then refresh your turrets, which is actually super helpful to do. But essentially, using these 3 skills, we are going to apply lots of status effects because the 2 turrets do both freeze and toxic, and we're also going to be applying status effects with some of our class trees, which we'll get into in a little bit, to apply additional status effects so that we can further increase our damage, not only with status effects, but also the amount of damage we do by some of the new Pax tree stuff, which is really cool. For your mods and gear, it's hard to say exactly what you should focus on because of how random the loot drops are, and I had tons of success with this build before I even got all of the pieces that I really wanted. But once you get all of the pieces, this build just really shines through. There is a couple of mods that you really should focus on, whether that's on a specific set piece or actually just getting that mod. The first is Double Trouble for the cryo turret. So deploy an enhanced turret with 2 barrels instead of 1, doubling the fire output. You can also pick up the increased damage for the cryo output, which is a tier 1 mod, easy to get. The hail shot is another tier 1 mod, which is super important to get. Increases the turret's damage based on your status power, and because what status power does is it increases your damage done with all of the status effects. And as this build is primarily focused on doing status effects, one, you want to have as much status power as possible to increase your damage with those status effects, but then also you can increase your cryo turret's damage with those status effects as well. The improved coolet, once you get it, it doubles the fire rate of the deployed turrets, and the really important one, which just more than doubles the production of your cryo turret, is twins. So you can summon 2 turrets before the cooldown is placed. So theoretically, you get 3 turrets out at one time at all of the time. I'm using the Techmonger set here, which using turret skills increases the turret damage by 10%. This lasts for 10 seconds and stacks 5 times. Now, I'm considering tinkering with the Frozen set, so increases your damage for frozen enemies by 50%, because mostly this build focuses on the cryo turrets, which deal the cryo damage and freezes everyone, so then you get that damage. I'm going to tinker with that in the future, but I think this is really solid as a build, and I also love this headpiece that I got as a drop. But essentially, that is the main things you need. For your weapons, you really can use any weapon you like. It's entirely up to you. Because you are not the star of the show here, your turrets are, so any weapon that you find that you enjoy using, you can literally just put that on. I just put on any tier 3 mod that just does damage, because it doesn't really matter. As long as you're just getting some damage output from your weapons to clean up the enemies, then it doesn't matter too much what your weapon choices actually are. You should be looking for anomaly power, cooldown reduction, and status power for your secondary stats on your gear. It's not super important, but anomaly power is the main one that you want to make sure you get, because all of this build revolves around having a maximum anomaly power, so make sure you get as much of that as possible and level up the secondary stat. Your class skills primarily want to focus on buffing your anomaly damage and any way that you can increase the damage overall from your turret. So realistically, what we focused on here for our lines is basically just picking up all of the anomaly damage nodes. We've also spec'd a little bit into Tech Shaman, not necessarily for any of the health benefits, though it is important, but to increase damage overall to frozen targets, to reduce some gadget cooldowns, as well as picking up Exposing Frost, which is the important one. So every time freeze is applied to an enemy, vulnerable status is also applied, so we can apply multiple statuses just by applying freeze, as well as Mark for Execution just to make vulnerable more effective. Then we're just continuing through the Demolisher line and picking up any of these nodes along the way. The good thing about this build is that none of the major nodes really are super important for this build. You can just ignore most of them because it is all about your turrets. The adrenalizing antenna is potentially important because it's activating on decay skill, so when you activate your blighted turret, then you get anomaly power, but I've decided to opt for picking up anomaly fueled and the decay toxin nodes up here rather than focusing necessarily on picking that up, though you could drop one and pick that up if you choose. For your Pax trees, there is only one really option, and that is to go through to pick up Dissection. So you deal 5% more damage to enemies for every status effect applied to them. Now, we are are applying so many status effects, it is ridiculous. So you're just going to get that 5% damage bonus. At least it's going to be a minimum 15% for freeze, toxic, and vulnerable, but you're going to be applying more statuses by your weapons and then by other effects as well, plus the permanence before that node, which will, every time you apply toxic, you apply an additional random status. So realistically, that's like 20% extra damage just from using these nodes and shooting out enemies. Your Ascension points should focus on the anomaly line primarily. Mainly, you want to pick up anomaly power here, then anomaly damage, and then status power. They're the three primary anomaly focus lines that you need to pick up. After that, you can really go down into the prowess line and pick up cooldown reduction, some of the crit chance and crit damage down here as well, those kind of things. And then I would move down into brutality to pick up some of the weapon damages here just to improve your overall functionality, and then endurance if you're really struggling. But because this build just primarily you just need to survive, you don't need to be doing damage with your weapons, you don't really need to buff your health and damage, sorry, you don't really need to buff your health and armor that much because you can just avoid the damage that's coming towards you. Some tips for playing this Technomancer build is to stay with your turrets at all times. They will protect you, even if you don't have that mod that lowers the amount of damage you receive when you're near them, they will protect you, right? They are the sole focus of this build. So stay with them as much as possible. They'll destroy things for you, and then you can just clean up any of the stragglers with your weapon, really, because your main weapon isn't the strong part of this build, right? You're probably not going to deal heaps of damage, and you can even see in this footage that my weapon is like a piddly little pistol that does like barely any damage, whereas all the damage is coming from the turrets itself. Cold Snap can save you by freezing all the enemies around you, then allowing you to reapply your turrets as well. Even if your turrets are still active and the cooldowns have finished, you should recast them because you do get bonuses from your anomaly power by actually casting them, as well as they will do a massive amount of damage just in that initial portion. And it's also good if they're like attacking the wrong thing, which, I mean, it happens sometimes where you could be just dying to an elite and your turrets are off like shooting something in the distance. So refreshing them and really changing that target priority for your turrets can be really helpful in those scenarios. But in terms of like bosses and stuff like that, the turrets will always know who to shoot and they just absolutely melt away at bosses. And your main focus as the player itself is really to stay alive, right? As long as you're alive and your turrets are dealing damage, you are absolutely okay. It is perfectly fine in this build to stop shooting. Like, it's kind of funny to say, but you can literally just stand there and let your turrets just do all the work. Like, if you're struggling with positioning, stuff like that, just, you know, avoid the red on the ground and don't even worry about shooting. Your turrets will give you health back because of their dealing damage, but also you can then just keep yourself alive, which is the main focus as a solo player, because we don't get a revive as a solo player. It's also best to stay in long range as much as possible with this build because the Technomancer automatically gets bonuses to long range damage just as a passive because of this class. So the longer range you are at, the more damage you'll do, and it's also beneficial because you can avoid some of that melee damage when you're getting stuck in between enemies. Even without some of the mods and the legendary gear that I have in this footage, this build still works. I was able to kill the last boss and plenty of the other enemies without too much difficulty, even before I had like the secondary turret and tons of the other bonuses here. So you will have success in this build and it will just continue to get better the more mods you put into it. And that is my solo Technomancer build. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza and I hope you have a great day.